Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the BEC EnviroSeries online conference, Urban Transport on the Move, Connecting Policies, People, and Business Opportunities. This is the third session of today's conference, entitled Business Innovation and Opportunities in Post-COVID-19 Urban Mobility. My name is Ron Chung from Smart Charge, and I'll be the moderator for today. On behalf of the organizer, Business Environment Council, I would like to thank our participants, supporting organizations, and most importantly, our sponsors, including CLP Power Hong Kong Limited, MTR Corporation, Shell Hong Kong Limited, the Hong Kong Electric Company Limited, and the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Now, today's format, our speakers will each do a very short presentation first, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So to kick things off, I'd like to invite the first speaker of the session, Mr. Daniel Weitze, from Siemens, from the e-mobility team. So welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you to the Business Environment Council for inviting me and for giving the opportunity to share how we at Siemens see a sustainable future and how we moving beyond in integrating solutions towards zero carbon living and also mobility. So I'm based now 3 years in Hong Kong, and I saw a lot of change in these 3 years, which is positive. And I think there is still a lot of room for improvement, what we can do, what we can bring to Hong Kong. And this is something, as Siemens, we also see globally. So globally, our cities are changing, and air quality, sustainability, quality of life are key drivers to attract business and also citizens to come to a smart, green, environmental friendly city. This is, if you look at elderlies, so they're looking for a nice place where they can retire, but also for young people, they would like to live in a green city where they can breathe fresh air, where they can move around in a secure environment. And this is a trend we see globally, in Europe, in the United States, but also especially in Asia. And what we believe as a company is that e-mobility combined with public transport, ride-sharing and on-demand services is the key to decarbonize the urban mobility. And what you see on this slide, I like it very much, is basically the CO2 emissions which are generated per traveler and per transport mode. So that's on the left side. And what you realize there is, of course, in Hong Kong we have MTR, which is the backbone of transportation for the public, and this is already quite good with an average globally 14 gram per traveler and transport. But there's more we can do, and also an importance, what I try to visualize on the right side of this page, what you can see is how traffic is distributing in the road network. So if you see in the first example, you have like round about 200 people in 170 cars, and the full road is occupied. And this is also a challenge we see in Hong Kong. We still have annual growth of new cars. So the registration of new cars, it's still growing. Every year we have more cars, more private cars on the road. And this occupies space. And what you see further, how does it look like without cars? I mean, it looks much better, so there's much more space. But if you want to travel a long distance, it's not an option that you just walk. So we need to think about what could be concepts, how we can change and come to a shared autonomous mobility, for example, in this context. So you could imagine that in future, this people there without cars could traveling around in the city with autonomous shuttles, which are shared for the whole economy. So that means you also don't need parking space anymore, and you can distribute the whole ecosystem. Or we focus on public transport. These are the lower examples in the road network. So we have today already buses, but maybe we can also do more. We can prioritize them. We can enforce the bus lanes to make sure that the buses are on time, that people are more happy to use the bus because they are arriving on time and are not stuck in a traffic jam. And also light rail trains are for some areas a great alternative to save space in the urban environment. And at the same time, because all these modes are electrified, reduce carbon emission. Now you can say, okay, we have MTR already. We have light rail as well. But where the energy comes from. And this is in fact a big challenge. But what we do at Siemens, we make real-world technology that works for everyone. And what I try to visualize on this slide is that you see on one hand at Siemens, in our Siemens group, we have Siemens Energy. And they moving full force ahead in the direction of renewable energy, sustainable energy production. And this is exactly the key. So we need to start in this area in order to enable our smart infrastructure and also enable sustainable transportation. And also there, we can really serve a lot of businesses and support businesses in Hong Kong and around the globe. So we have our e-mobility portfolio in Siemens. We have smart infrastructure, like also very famously in Hong Kong, the zero carbon building, which you see in the middle, which is also benchmark in Hong Kong. We have intermodal solutions, which also can help to guide the public and citizens through the city more environmentally friendly, by providing them information in advance, allowing them to reserve and plan their trips more efficient based on their user behavior and preferences. And again, also with Siemens Energy, we just signed a collaboration with Siemens Mobility and the German railway, DB. And with them jointly, we will develop a hydrogen train. So that's especially important for areas where you don't have overhead lines. And on the infrastructure side, if we talk about rail, we also have introduced solutions like our energy optimized operations, which is basically continuously analyzing the train schedule and the demand in the network, and optimizing the train control system. And with these measures, we are also proven already that we can reduce energy consumptions over the life cycle during operation, avoiding peaks, which can be very expensive energy consumption peaks, as well as what we do overall in this context is as well to develop our whole portfolio in this direction, and Siemens is investing a lot in this area. And this is also our invitation, especially for Hong Kong, because today we are in Hong Kong. Talk to us. We are very happy to share more examples, and we are very happy to and keen to support all businesses in Hong Kong with our solutions to become more sustainable and create additional value add for our citizens here in Hong Kong. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And now I'd like to introduce our second speaker today, Mr. Charles Ho. He's the chairman of the Smart Mobility Committee of the Smart City Consortium. So please welcome Charles.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you, BEC, to invite me to speak on behalf of SCC on this people-centric urban system. So before I move on to the Smart Mobility Initiative, I would like to just to recap some of the facts in the baseline of Hong Kong. Hong Kong, a very small place with high populations. We have a workforce of around 4 million, but we also have a very high populations of elderly. Over 18% is over 65 years old. And we have a very high public transport riderships. Over 90% of our people are travel by public transport in Hong Kong. But in terms of roads, our growth for the past 10 years is relatively very slow. It's only talking about 4% growth in the past 10 years. And for railway, it's 27%. And, but in terms of car, actually the growth for the past 10 years is talking about 40%. So you can see why we have a very high public transport ridership, but we still having traffic congestion problems in the areas. And in terms of parking, the growth is only about 8%. So we're also facing problems in finding parkings in the urban area or in even suburban area. So there's a lot of problems with these basic infrastructures, but luckily we have a very high mobile and broadband penetrations, over 95% and 274% for the mobile subscriptions rate. This just highlights some of the mobility challenges that we are facing. As we mentioned just now, we have a very aging problems. And by 2026, we have over quarters of our population will be over 65. And we have facing growing congestions in all modes of transport, not just talking about car, but also talking about the public transport, we are also facing congestions. And we need to address our parking space problems. And there's also growing demand of the cross-boundary movements of peoples and goods. And there's still a lot of room to improve our sustainability of our infrastructures. And we also need to enhance our road infrastructures and review our regulations and standards in order to cope with the latest technology developments. Although we have a very high public transport ridership, we still have to face, we need to provide a public transport network that is highly reliable, highly available, and with a predictable journey times, and to improve our traffic experience for people. So this slide just highlights some of the smart trends in mobility development, like connected and automated vehicles, smart corridors like smart roadways, smart highways, sharing mobilities, the moving from the ownership to sharing concept, and active mobility, the concept to be using non-mechanics movement like walking, cycling, and others, and mobility as a service. These are all recent trends in the smart mobility development. And today, I just want to highlight the two of them is the smart corridors and the CAV, because they are quite interrelated. In terms of the connected and automated vehicles, actually has been a wide deployments in various transportation systems already, like autonomous shuttles within a park, autonomous bus running along some bus corridor or general roadways. We have robot taxis. We have autonomous utility vehicles in the street. And in terms of the logistics side, we also have a lot of deployments of autonomous vehicles in mining, in ports, in airports to transfer the materials, containers, or the luggage handlings. And also, of course, we can have a lot of last mile logistic using the autonomous vehicles like for the delivery or for the goods or for the parcel in the last mile. But whether autonomous vehicles is the solution to our traffic congestion problem, maybe not. Because if it's all privately owned autonomous vehicle, then it just creates more and more car ownerships. Then it's creating more and more occupation of road space. This will in turn be unsustainable and maybe even causing more traffic problems. So our target is to have a share fleet of autonomous vehicles. Of course, at first, it may be competing with the traditional public transport system. It will be, but at least it will improve the better mobilities and but the efficiencies still have room to improve. The ultimate goal will be have the autonomous vehicle fleet to tie in and integrate it with the traditional public transport so that they can help each other and serving the different purpose. And with this in mind that we can have a sustainable and a better mobility service. So the benefits of the AV actually will not be fully recognized until the AVs are introduced in fleets of driverless shared autonomous vehicles of a different size and to reinforce our efficient, high operations public transport networks, supporting active mobilities. So with the autonomous vehicles in place and then keep growing and keep development, of course, we need to look at our infrastructures. We need to have a smart corridors in order to support this development, in order to make full use of this AV development. So a smart corridor, this is just a basic framework of a smart corridor. So when we talk smart corridor, maybe we need to look at the physical infrastructures. Like we need a well-maintained highway. We need to have machine-readable markings. We need to have a digital signage, digital signaling. And for the digital infrastructures, we need to have ubiquitous, high reliable connectivity. We need to have high accuracy on the location, the GPS, using GPS or other device. We need to have a lot of road sensors to look at the traffic conditions, weather conditions, road conditions, and all this, and for incident detections. And also, we need a coordination structure, infrastructures. The coordination infrastructures is a system to try to manage the vehicle coordination and help in the interoperability. And it should also have the ability for the transportations to set up policy goals so that they can manage and maintain the mobility and accessibilities and track the impacts. And of course, with these smart corridors, we need to have a compatible CAV, the compatible connected and autonomous vehicles. So the vehicles should be a certified autonomous vehicle or autonomous driving assistance system. So they should be able to share with different vehicles and also the infrastructures so that they can have a better utilization of the corridor and better utilizations of the infrastructures and enhance the safety of the corridor. And lastly, of course, we are not making the smart corridor purely for the private vehicle. We want to make sure it is also fully compatible with the public transport. We want to make sure the autonomous bus or autonomous share mobility can make use of this smart corridor. And then the passengers can use of apps or other things to make sure they have the arrival time, departure times, and all the boarding and boarding requirements and the occupancy or whatever. So these are some examples of the components within the different smart corridors. So for the smart corridor, we use the term of a cooperative intelligent transport system, CITS. In the old days, we talk about a lot of intelligent transport system in our road corridor. And for this new generation, we talk about more is the cooperative intelligent transport system, CITS. So this will be more focused on the safety and efficiency by the V2V, V2I, and V2P communications. The system will provide more about accident-related informations, such as the sudden stop, fallen objects, or incidents or accidents, and all this. And rather than providing one-way traffic informations in like the traditional ITS, the CITS will communicate two ways, communication with the road infrastructures and the vehicles to spread and share all the real-time informations. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to build an artificial smart road network for full autonomous drivings. And you can see on the diagram on the right is basic structures. We need a roadside infrastructure to detect any incident. We need a V2I so that the vehicles on the road can be informed about the incident. And then the vehicle upstream through the V2V communication, they know that there's an incident ahead so that they can make the decision maybe to divert to other route so that to minimize the congestion level. And this kind of smart corridor actually is getting more and more popular, and many countries like Korea, China, and also US has been looking into this kind of smart corridor trial. Very recently, the Michigan actually planned to design a 40 miles self-driving vehicles roadways between the downtown Detroit and Airport. And then this is, at the beginning, it will be on the connected bus and shared mobility, and then ultimately will be additional with other freight and personal vehicles. In Hong Kong, our authority also has already developed a Sigma system. It's actually, this integrates with 5 key objectives of smart mobility for Hong Kong, including safety, information, screen, mobile, and accessibility. So that it can formulate, when they formulate the future's new smart mobility initiative, they can prioritize them. And then there's 3 major gears, which include the smart transport infrastructures, the applications, and the data to drive this smart mobility roadmap. And lastly, because of the COVID, actually, we are facing a lot of change in our travel behavior. Like social distance, actually, people are more preferring a less crowded condition. E-commerce, actually, there's a major growth in the shopping, in the food online, and so they're changing all the behavior and the demand on the last mile delivery. And also the commuter behaviors. More and more people are work from home and the flexi hours, and they change their trip purpose, like repurposing, respacing, and retiming, and change the whole patterns. Of course, people are also expecting a higher experience because more reliable service, look for more real-time service, and better experience on the mobility. And also, people are start to looking more on the healthy side, and then they are more growing interest in using walking and cycling. And lastly, of course, people are getting more travel safety cautious, and then they will have a more stronger influence on the future mode choice. I think this is a unique opportunity to realign and reshape our transport network after the COVID on this, using the advanced technology to come up with a more sustainable, people-centric, sustainable mobility system. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. That's very interesting. For our third speaker of the day, I'd like to introduce Ms. Yuan Shi, who will be joining us actually live from Shanghai right now. She's the Global Solutions Lead of the new mobility team from Arcadis. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Shi.
Thank you, Ron. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to join you virtually today. And I'm Yuan Shi, the Global Solution Lead for New Mobility at Arcadis. And Arcadis is a global design and consulting firm for natural and built asset. And we have over 27,000 professionals across the globe. And today I'd love to use these 5 minutes to quickly share some of our insights in the global trends and opportunities of electric vehicle market. So start with the global trends. Here from the graph, we can see global electric car stock in the past decade. And as you can tell here, I just realized the graph is showing here now. So great. So as you can tell, the car stock has grown exponentially over the past 10 years. However, this year, 2020, due to the pandemic, the overall car sales market contracted. And the EV car sales decreased from the previous quarter by 57% in China and by 33% in the US. And in comparison, European EV market increased by 25%. And that's a result of continuous financial incentives through subsidies, as well as public policies. Speaking of public policies, UK just announced last week on November 18th, it would ban the sales of new gasoline and diesel vehicles by the year 2030, which is 10 years ahead of its initial plan. Similarly, in California, the ban of sales of new petrol or diesel-powered cars by 2035 and the ban of diesel trucks and vans by 2045. So in addition to the ban of new sales, there are also policies like in Paris, a low emission zone, which means by 2030, it would only allow battery electric vehicle or hydrogen powered cars to enter the low emission zone. So with all these headlines, what does it tell us? So in short, the trend will still hold true for the future with the continuous policy support, even though currently we are experiencing some economic downturn and the contraction in the market. And what does it mean for us, for businesses, for cities, for public agencies? What are the opportunities? So here I categorize the different types of the market players related to the electric vehicle industry. So first, for OEMs, car manufacturers, it means we need extensive charging infrastructure so that consumers have the faith to purchase electric vehicles. And it's not only applying to car manufacturers, also applies to the dealer network. And oftentimes we see the collaboration between the dealer companies, dealer network with OEM to invest in those charging networks. Secondly, for fleet owners, so it takes over a decade easily to transition a large fleet from a fossil fuel powered fleet to an electric fleet. It's a capital intensive investment as well as investment for charging network. So we really need to plan ahead to be able to achieve those targets in 2030, 2040. And next, mobility service providers, including car sharing companies like taxi firms and logistics firms. Similarly to fleet owners, they would need to transition the vehicles themselves as well as providing the charging infrastructure. And next, for cities, counties, transportation agencies, these organizations would need to provide the public charging infrastructure for citizens, for visitors to charge their cars, as well as transition their own fleet. So fleets, for example, like the municipality waste collection trucks or bus fleets, these all need to be transitioned in order to reach those zero emission targets. And next, retailers and real estate companies. So it's part of the branding, it's part of providing the services for their customers. It's also required by the market and the consumers to see the charging infrastructure at the new real estate stores and the new construction real estate properties. And the next, utility companies. So this is a great opportunities for utility companies to sell more clean energy. And for oil and gas companies, this is a really pressing time now to think about how to diversify your revenue. And the leading oil and gas companies in the market has already been investing heavily in renewable energy, such as hydrogen and other sources of energies. So comes to a city level, it means the refueling station would need to consider transition into a charging infrastructure, and in future it's going to be hydrogen refueling station. So with all these trends and opportunities, Arcadis is providing services from planning to implementation. And if you or your organization is interested in any of the topic I just talked about, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuan. For the fourth speaker of the day, I'd like to introduce Dr. Anthony Lowe, Director of Corporate Customer Experience from CLP Power Hong Kong. So welcome, Anthony.
Thanks, Ron. Good afternoon, everybody. Friends BEC's invitation for us to have a chance to present what CLP, a utility company, have been doing to drive the adoption of EV in Hong Kong, and what is our role in support the EV application in the coming future. So as you all know, climate change is one of the most important sustainability issue. Transition to electrification of transport can make a difference in greenhouse gas emission. Hong Kong is a compact city, and the point-to-point distance is quite close. Typical the driving distance is talking about maybe 15 kilometers per travel, and hence the range anxiety is very low. So when there is we have a very reliable power supply, to achieve a greener and cleaner electricity generation, we are now pushing down our coal-fired generation and increase the usage of LNG. So this can help further lower the carbon footprint of electrification of transport and encourage the use of EV. And EV is now very popular in Hong Kong, and so Hong Kong is well positioned for electrification of transportation. So being a major electricity power supply company in Hong Kong, so we see our role in leading and enable this transition. So we start our low carbon driving journey since 1984, and we keep to drive the use of different applications. As of today, we have more than 200 EVs. So as shown in this line, you see that our low carbon driving journey, we use different EVs in our daily operation. Say, for example, private car, light trucks, minibus, and even coach to support our daily operation. CLP Power is the first Hong Kong company to join the EV 100 global initiative, which is initiated by international NGO, Climate Group. So we plan to convert more than 1,000 cars to EV by 2030. Besides, we also provide different charging facility at our workplace to encourage our staff to switch to EV. So this is one of our commitments to drive the adoption of EV in Hong Kong. Here shows the milestone of the development of our public EV charging network. During the past 10 years, we have done a lot to support the application of EV. Say, for example, we set up our first EV public charger, and we also introduced the multi-standard quick charger in 2015. Then, we also installed the same charger in different supply areas and hope to further promote the green driving in Hong Kong. This map shows the location of different charging stations in our supply area. As of today, we have more than 160 charging points in our supply area. In this charging station, we are mainly providing 3 different types of charger standard. That is European, Japanese, British standard, to support most of the electric vehicle on the Hong Kong market. Other than that, we also provide free charging service until the end of next year. So this is also to encourage more and more drivers to switch to use of EV. To enhance the EV driver's experience, we also developed our app and also provide more information in our app. So the driver can download our app and check our app for the location and the usage of all the EV charging stations, as I mentioned in previous slides. And they can receive our latest service about how to support them install the charger or the meter for those EV parking area. Moreover, the driver can also search for the location of charging station on our app and web, and they also can see the status of the charging station, detailed map, and the navigation route. Next year, we will also include more and more functions to enhance the EV driver's experience. Say, for example, they can have the real-time availability of the EV charger. They can also check the real-time charging status. And we also expect or hope to let the driver can book the EV parking space, and so that they do not wait for so long. Once they book the parking space, when they arrive the car park, so that they can get the EV charging station. To support the government's EV charging at home subsidy scheme, which is just launched a few weeks ago, so we also have our EcoCharge service to provide one-stop support to all our customers in different areas. So the first one is that the power supply capacity. If the customer have to apply for this subsidy scheme, they have to ensure that they have the sufficient power supply. So once we receive the application from our customer, so that we can provide a written assessment report in around 2 weeks' time to help the customer to apply for the funding. Once they get the funding, they have to enhance or upgrade their power supply network, and we will also have to contact our customer or consultant once we receive the application within the 2 days, so that we can provide the professional advice on how to upgrade or improve their power supply level in the premises. And the first stage is that once the customer have already installed the backbone or the infrastructure in the premises, they may have to, some of the user to install install charger in the car parks, they have to install the meter. So once we receive the application, so we also have our performance patch is that within 2 days, we will contact our customer and then to arrange the site visit and provide some technical advice and on how to install the meter installation. Other than the private car, public transport is also play a very important part in the electrification of transportation and reduce the greenhouse gas emission. So we're also working with various stakeholders to select the location on how to put the charger to facilitate the application of public EV. And also, we have to provide power for different locations to ensure that this can match or cope with the charger so that the operator can apply the public vehicle in different locations and to provide public transportation in Hong Kong. To support the development of the power supply infrastructure, vehicle-to-grid is also play very important in this area. So we have also looking at this. V2G is a new technology. This can enable the energy that can push back to the grid. And it also can bring the benefit to different stakeholders, power utility, EV owner, and also the V2G charging operator. For power utility, with V2G, if there's any momentary electricity consumption spikes in a building, it can help to balance with the health of electric car, and there's no extra energy need to be consumed from the grid. So V2G can help to balance out the electricity demand and also avoid unnecessary costs for the building and electricity system. Even for the EV owner, the V2G operator can also provide incentive to the owner, which can lower the cost of ownership of EV. But as I've said, V2G is a new model. There's still a lot of challenge that we have to cope with. Say, for example, the high cost of the V2G. How about the grade of the battery? And also, if there's any EV decided for V2G, a lot of this kind of the matter that we have to look into. So as a lot of overseas experience that they have to do a lot of trial, so we'll still continue to investigate how to make V2G to be commercialized and widely applied in Hong Kong and bring a viable benefit to our ecosystem player. Another one we are now looking is that in view of the trend of the mobility transformation, we foresee that the EV charging technology will emerge, and they will also change the landscape of the whole ecosystem and our business environment. So as you see in this slide, what we are now always using is talking about the quick charger, high power charger. For other overseas countries, they are now looking for robotic or wireless or some even wireless charging on road. But In Hong Kong, we're still not in this area, but I think this will come in the coming future. So we have to look at our infrastructure, how to support this new EV charging technology. So to sum up, the success of electrification of transport in Hong Kong, this relies on the effort of all of you. We will continue to drive electrification of transport and keep powering Hong Kong into smart, green, and low-carbon city. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. For today's fifth speaker, we have Clement Ho, who's the digital transport leader for the East Asia region from Arup. So welcome, Clement.
Hi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, BEC, for inviting me to share about connected autonomous vehicles. I actually worked in a company called Arup, looking after transport, resilient, and also digital transport. Before we dive into connected autonomous vehicle, I actually echo one of our speakers' talks about earlier on. Connected autonomous vehicle is not the solutions. It is not going to solve our. It's not going to solve all of our congested traffic. What we really need to do is a magic component, CAV plus shared use. This is what we need in the future. Okay. Okay. Let us talk about. Sorry. Okay, apologize for the technical glitch. Let me start again. Let us talk about the disbenefit and also the benefits about CAV. Okay, in the COVID-19 situations, what we really looked at is we will be able to reduce a lot of the human intersections, and in terms of having a lot of the getting all the humans away from the infections, CAV would be really, really useful. Okay. Also, what we need to do is having the 24/7, 24 hours, and also 7 days a week. That would actually, okay, let me go to the slide. Yep. Okay, you should be able to see the slide about the disbenefit and also the benefits, right? Yeah, here we go. I talk about the CAV. It is really a lot better than a human because we can actually handle and deal with all the human tireless and can provide a 24/7 operations. And in terms of a lot of emergency, who's going to handle all these dangerous goods, CAV would be another solutions. Creating certainties because CAV vehicles understanding where we are going, we know the destination, so that can create a lot of certainties, and we will be able to use the data and understand how we are using the road. Are there any spare capacity that we can deploy more vehicles, or whether we should plan our roads, we can actually reduce the number of lengths, etc. And having all this information, sharing this to operators, to government, and also mainly to users as well, we will be able to use informed decisions. And also, we talk about effective use of resources, safer environment. Because of shared use, all these CAVs would need to be able to self-sanitate. Okay, that can actually give us a safer environment. And because CAV can be packed in a lot closer distance and actually save our road space. However, there are drawbacks. Okay? The impact on our labor market, the drivers, what are they going to do? There are safety concerns. We need to change the behavior and our mindset. How can we actually provide a safe environment, making sure that people trust the systems? Infrastructure investment. With all these existing roads, how can we transform our roads into CAV ready? Okay. The other point that I want to make is the human drivers bullying, right? Because one of our projects that we've currently worked on, we really need to address how the human-driven vehicles can actually allow a CAV to actually go through the system and not really taking advantage of a CAV. Last but not least is the privacy issues. Are we going to trust the system? Okay. And there are 4 key aspects and opportunities in terms of CAV systems. I'll start from behavior. We need to change our mindset, but how are we going to do it? There are safety concerns we need to address. We need to build trust and also the privacy in terms of data. The next one is technology. Technology, I would say, among all of these aspects is the easiest, okay, in a sense, relatively easier. Machine versus human, what do we need to do to make sure this is a fair system? There are a lot of technology we can create in terms of using a gamified environment and using the computer powers to do a lot of scenario testing to make sure the system can be as safe as possible. City planners on infrastructure, what do we need to actually plan ahead for our infrastructure to be ready? The third one is stakeholders. It's a private and also public partnership. Okay, we need to work together to make sure that we can benefit from this in terms of user, operators, government investor, and also the insurer as well. If there are going to be incidents happen, who is reliable for this? Data trust, can we share the data, and how are we going to share it? Not just for the CAV system, but also for different operators. Data, who's going to host the data, and the data analytics, okay, at the very back end, who's going to maintain this? And therefore, last but not least is governance. Governments and also a lot of the stakeholders must work together to paint the way forward in terms of policy. We need a clear roadmap. Pilot areas would be one of the good measures that we can enable public to see the benefit from it. We need support, we need promotion, and also how can we measure the system performance? Okay. On the left-hand side, this is what happens at the moment, and then transit to the right-hand side, that's fully CAV. What is challenging? I just want to leave some of the food of thought for everyone. In between, there is going to be a hybrid stage. This is the most challenging, where we are having human and also CAV intervention. How can we address this stage? Again, we need to build trust and share the data. We need public support. And how can we create a top-down from the government vision and also a bottom-up from public and stakeholders? The last slide in here, I just want to touch on. We worked with Rockefeller Foundations to identify city resilience. And in terms of transport, well, there are 12 different aspects. Transport is only one of those. And there are 52 different aspects we can look at and we should look at. One of these, in terms of transport, is providing reliable mobility. Reliable mobility is not just for private car user. There are going to be, the system needs to be inclusive for mobility impaired travelers and also for elderly. CAV is just one part of the total transport resilience. May I leave you value propositions? In Hong Kong, there are 628,000 private cars, which account for 70% of our total vehicles in Hong Kong. What if we will be able to reduce using shared vehicles and also CAV, reduce 30% or only 20%? What happens to our road infrastructure? Okay, can we reduce this? And also our car parking space. Thank you.
Thank you, Clement. Very interesting indeed. For the last speaker of the day, joining us live from Singapore, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Yuri, who's the Director of Technology Research Project and Fellow of the Center of Urban Studies and Urban Planning at Hong Kong U. So welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much, and kudos to BEC for organizing this. I apologize for the ghosting on my shirt. My computer seems to have a problem with backdrops. The title of the program, Intermodal Transport Data Sharing Program, is a bit of a mouthful, but it covers many of the issues that have been raised by previous speakers, although by no means all. Firstly, also I'd like to thank the sponsors, including funding from the Innovation Technology Fund for the program, and MTR, Daimler, Thales, and VIA. The basis of this program is that it's an evidence-based public policy program, and it's an open collaborative program, which, if we go to the next slide, will be clear. Let's start at the top, which is where the ITF funding took place. The program started in July and will run through until January 2021. It actually started as an idea following the publication of the Central Policy Unit paper in 2015 on smart city report development. So that's proof that not all reports gather dust. This one we picked up. And in 2018, Ms. Carrie Lam made a statement bemoaning the fact that data sharing among transport operators wasn't as common as it would need to be for smart city development. And from there on, we developed this idea of the program. We set out to commit to talk directly to stakeholders. So those included operators, vendors, government agencies, NGOs, and researchers. And it included some of the people on our panel today, Charles, Daniel, and Clement, for example. And last year, we ran a series of forums and workshops for all the stakeholders. And from that came the idea of a series of use cases that we could examine during the program. So if we can go to the next slide. So the program itself consists of two streams. One is the data trust, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And the other is a global cities research. The data trust principally is run under the supervision of Dr. Zhu at the University of Hong Kong. And the Hong Kong team management is Andrew Pickford, Terry Graham, and a research assistant, Sam. And it involves data controllers offering data to the data trust, and data analytics providers, and also stakeholders who have use cases they wish to propose. And on the other side, the Global Cities Research, we have two research assistants, Valerie and Leslie, who are helping us look at cities such as Paris, Sydney, London, Copenhagen, Chicago, to see if there are useful and valuable examples that could be applicable to Hong Kong. And then in addition to that, we are looking in detail at Hong Kong on policy and regulatory issues. Valtrap and Marina are taking the lead on that. On-demand mobility options, Andrew and Terry are taking the lead on that. And environmental issues, which I'm leading along with Dr. Jenny Yuan. And in all these cases, we're looking at issues of the role of data as an evidence-based policy making, whether it's public open data, commercially sensitive data, or various data sharing business models that may work in Hong Kong. Next slide, please. From the environmental side, the environmental interest group, as we call it, we published a paper, a working paper, called Decarbonizing Public Transport in Hong Kong. And this afternoon, Michael Cheng mentioned decarbonizing private transport in Hong Kong. So maybe this is a good complement to that paper. Basically, in this paper, which is online and you can, it's available to anybody, I've looked at the health costs, tried to estimate those of pollution arising directly from public vehicles, principally buses, using models from the Chinese University and Hong Kong University. The models don't match, so one has to look at the assumptions and the way the models have been put together. But for the moment, we can estimate that around about $800 million Hong Kong average arises from premature deaths, visits to the doctor, stays in hospital, and loss of productivity. Against that, the estimated costs of replacing the entire bus fleet, which is principally double-decker buses, which is over 6,000 in Hong Kong, replacing them by e-buses would amount to around about the ballpark figure of 24 billion Hong Kong dollars from around about 2024 onwards. I say 2024 because most of the literature I've looked at suggests that that is probably the earliest date when the models of those buses will be available on a large scale. In addition, of course, there are the costs that have been mentioned by other speakers, namely the costs of building an infrastructure for recharging or refueling in the case of hydrogen fuel cells. And of course, there's also, we're looking at a case for redesigning the public transport interchanges in Hong Kong and the street connections to the stations to assist the most common form of transport in Hong Kong, which is walking the first mile and the last mile, and also looking at the problems facing disabled people to make those journeys and the role for cycling to interconnect with other forms of transport. Next slide, please. And just to come back to the data trust itself, because this is really the key model that we hope will have some legacy for Hong Kong. We're taking as a proof of concept the Exchange Square public transport interchange. With the Hong Kong U, MOUs are being signed with those who are contributing data, operators, payment providers, and others. The data is being anonymized by hashing. It's being encrypted when it's sent to the data trust at the Hong Kong U. And there are transport data algorithm service providers who are offering algorithmic assistance in the treatment of use cases. Government departments are involved in both the Privacy Commission has validated the MOUs as meeting privacy requirements, which is a very important consideration. Government agencies are engaged in the workshops that we've been running and are invited to propose use cases that would be of use to government. And finally, the data trust itself, as I mentioned previously, is managed by the Hong Kong U very much as a trusted third party. There have been one or two previous examples of trusted third parties. Two that come to my mind are Octopus Card itself in the 1990s. And also, I believe the Chinese University became the first internet exchange provider, providing interconnection between different internet service providers. So the trusted third-party model seems to work in Hong Kong, and we are trying it in this context. Hong Kong U enters into the MOUs with the data controllers and the service and the analytic service providers. The data trust will carry out tests and simulations on the data, testing out use cases, and coming up with results which we have obviously to have by the end of the program, which is the end of January 2021. And the legacy will be after January 2021, a data trust which we hope will have proved itself as a proof of concept and can be used by basically anyone in any situation for any sector of the economy as a way forward. So we're hoping that will be the lasting contribution of this program to the to Hong Kong. And of course, if we can find ways of funding the continuation of that work beyond January, we'll be very happy to do so. So the final slide is from my dog called Phoebe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yuri. That was very interesting and lovely photo as well. Now, we now enter the Q&A session of today's panel. So for the audience out there, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in a box that says Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Now, to kick things off, I'll probably direct my first question for Daniel. You're closest to me. You were the first speaker. Now, my takeaway from your presentation is that it's not just about reducing the carbon footprint from an individual trip through maybe transitioning to a more low carbon platform, such as EVs. It's actually about increasing the utilization, the efficiency at an aggregate level of all journeys, all trips, and movement of goods as well. And yet that's through an interplay and coordination of all types of different transport modes. Now, obviously, that means there's going to be a lot of things happening by business, which are usually good at moving fast as well. Now, for such a landscape, how do we get such a thing done in an integrated fashion? What can we do that is a smart way to get this to happen, this integrated kind of transport that you were talking about?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ron. I think you need to look at the entire ecosystem on one hand, and this starts with the energy production. So how we produce energy. If you have everything electrified, where the energy comes from, and if it comes still from coal or not renewable resources, I mean, this is one challenge we have to tackle. And furthermore, you have to come from user stories. You need to understand why people want to own a private car, or why they have a need, maybe as well, why there's a need to own a private car. And I think once you analyze this, and that might, or this is definitely different, depending at which user groups you look. Let me give you an example. I mean, if you look at young people, also in Europe, we see this trend. Young people, they don't even bother to spend time to get a driver license anymore, especially if they live in big cities. There is no need. And on the other hand, what I also mentioned during my speech, if you look at elderly, they might not able to drive anymore because they have eyesight problems or other issues. So if you get older, you need, but you still want to move. Yeah? You want to visit your grandchildren. You want to visit your family. So and if you understand, so why the people are used, or what is the demand, what are their needs, then I believe you can come up with new concepts. And so in future, I strongly believe that autonomous shared mobility will be one part of it. It will definitely not solve it, but it will be one part, which allows you to bring more flexibility. Flexibility which you have today with a private car ownership, you will have in future with shared autonomous mobility. Because it will work like a Didi or like a Uber. So you just call it on demand when you need it, and it brings you everywhere. And the beauty is that this shared autonomous mobility, I mean, these vehicles, they can drive around basically 24/7. So that means there are also new concepts you can realize, so that during times where you have a high demand for passenger transportation in your network, in your city, you can utilize more vehicles to transport passengers, versus times maybe during the night where you have less passengers traveling through the city. You can utilize such ecosystem to transport goods, so that the next day in the morning, if the people go to work, if the people go shopping, you have food, you have goods at the shops. And I think if we can realize this, that would be amazing. And I also think it's a good approach to start small. Select an area where you say, okay, in this area we will test this approach, and we will just let public shared autonomous mobility vehicles, we just allow them to drive in this area. no private cars, no manual steering cars in this area. That could be an approach to test it. And I think that's the way. But again, you need to look at the whole ecosystem if you really want to create a change. And that starts on one hand with energy production, and on the other hand ends also then with the user stories for the stakeholders you want to move through the cities, and also to the needs and demands you have in a ecosystem like a smart city.
Thank you, Daniel. If I can just springboard off your question there, you touched on 2 points. One is the energy mix and the connected automated vehicles here. So for the first one, maybe I can ask Anthony this one. In terms of the Daniel's point there, we all know that e-mobility is a work in progress. It's a long-term journey for Hong Kong. Now, as per Daniel's point, that the energy mix does play a role in terms of the transforming the transport division here. Now, the interaction between the grid and, let's say, the mobility system is typically the grid supplies power, okay? Now, do you see this interaction evolving now? Is there anything that's happening now in e-mobility, the transport system, that's shaping the way that utilities do business? Or is it the utilities actually trying to also shape the way the mobility story is playing out? Maybe you can say a few words about that.
Okay, thanks Ron for the question. I put it like this. E-mobility is also an ecosystem which involves multiple interaction or cooperation among all the stakeholders. Say, for example, utility, car owner, or even renter, or etc. other parties. So I cannot say that this is which one shape which one, but there's a dependency among all these stakeholders. I put it in this way: is that, say, for example, utility. We cannot design the infrastructure without the application of the EV. And from the e-mobility point of view, that we cannot implement the EV without the support of utility on the design of the power supply infrastructure. So I would evaluate in 2 dimensions. The first dimension is that from utility point of view, we play a very important part in 4 areas. The first one is that about the power supply network. Second one is the EV charging. And the third one is about the smart meter. And the last one is our customer service. So all these kind of things is very important part to support e-mobility. On another side, another dimension is that from user point of view, because we have to understand about the user experience and their user pattern, so that this can help us to decide our supply network. And also, the application of electric vehicle can help us to optimize the use of our power supply network and support the use of mixed energy and renewable energy. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, that's the energy side of it. Now, if I can just quickly go to maybe the other part of Daniel's element there in terms of connected automated vehicles. So maybe I just want to ask Clement.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I can also supplement a little bit. Is about if I for these 2 dimensions, CLP also play a role in these 2 areas. For power utility, if we go for the power supply infrastructure, territorialized infrastructure is play a very important part to support the application of EV. So we are closely monitor and review our existing power supply network, how to plan ahead to review and decide that this can help meet the future needs. And on the charging network, as you know, also I mentioned in my previous presentation, the charging structure is now evolving. And there's a new charging technology, say, for example, robotic or some wireless charging on road. And this will change the ecosystem. So we have to, from utility point of view, we have to keep abreast of our knowledge on this area and understand about this type of technology, so that we can design the power supply level to match with the charging. And also from smart meter, because CLP Power is very support on the development of smart city. Smart meter, I can treat this not only an energy device, because, and you know, smart meter is just measure the energy consumption, but it doesn't like this. It also can play, I can say, a catalyst role to stimulate the drive or adoption of EV in Hong Kong, because smart meter can communicate with electric vehicle through Internet of Things. So they can say, for example, we can get the data to analyze the behavior of the car, And also, we can check with whether there's operation and maintenance surface for the car, and we understand the charging pattern of the behavior of the driver. All these kind of things can help us to design different kind of service. On the grid side, say for example, V2Grid, because vehicle to grid is that it can help push back the energy to the grid, and also they can treat as a grid supporter to support the use of mixed energy and renewable energy. And in the past few years, CLP Power is very keen to provide, to drive the use of renewable energy, because we launched the feed-in tariff scheme in 2018. So in the past 2 years, there's a lot of application on renewable energy. As you know, renewable energy is very intermittent in nature. So vehicle to grid this can help to smooth out the intermittence of RE. Other than that, if we can apply the RE, if there's any soft fault we can apply the V2G. If there's any soft fault on RE, V2G can pay back on this. So we are also close look at this area to see how we can do some of the pilot tests on V2G to apply in Hong Kong, because for V2G, there's still a lot of challenge that we have to overcome. So this is what we can play a role to support to drive the adoption EV in Hong Kong from utility point of view.
Yeah. And Anthony, you mentioned about the energy mix and making it cleaner, and it's been observed that electric vehicles are charged by the grid, and if you clean up the generation and make it cleaner, it's actually always easier to clean up the impact from a few power plants than it is for 700,000 tailpipes. So even moving the emissions from the cars themselves to the power generation is still advantageous. You can actually address it at its source. So it's quite interesting. Yeah. To Clement now, about the autonomous vehicles and the connected vehicles. Now, you mentioned a lot of benefits in your presentation. It's fascinating. So, the utilization, better use of space, and also the challenges on the labor market and whatnot. And I think these factors are certainly common in a lot of cities around the world, okay? In terms of it trying to move to using connected autonomous vehicles to help their transport mode. Now, personally, in your work in Hong Kong, and you also specialize in the East Asian region, is there anything you see different in Hong Kong that actually could propel autonomous vehicles further or maybe even hinder it? I mean, one example that my own personal experience is that I would say the barrier between vehicles and pedestrians is fluid in a sense, if you drive in a lot of congested areas. So there's a lot of worries. Can autonomous vehicles really function in such a fluid environment? So what are some of your views on that?
I might start from some of the example. The first one is Google. Google, some months ago, there are incidents involving pedestrian crossing and also the CAV. So that's already created a lot of noises and also affecting the development of CAVs. But subsequently, I mean, what I've in my presentation, I also highlight there are benefits and also lessons learned. Setting up pilot area, one of the example that I've worked on in mainland China, they have already set up pilot areas and also testing and addressing the concern about pedestrian, the interface between pedestrian and CAV, making sure that the system is safe. So having, we don't want to see any accidents for sure, but then I think the lesson learned is really important, and how we can create and enhance our systems to make sure that based on different pilot studies and also monitoring the performance and making sure that our mindset and the acceptance of CAVs can actually get one step at a time, and we can build things up like that.
That's interesting. And from my own personal interest, from a regulatory development, how are you seeing overseas and how the legal system, the regulatory system is will treat autonomous vehicles? An example is that if you do have an autonomous vehicle that gets into accidents or some sort of issues, is the responsibility of the driver, who's arguably not driving? Is it the designer of the algorithm? Is the infrastructure provider, the sensor manufacturer? So is there any sort of kind of emerging kind of views on how this is going to be regulated in the future?
Yeah. Again, I can share with you one of the projects that we've worked on in the UK. I shouldn't take all the credit, but our UK colleagues actually worked on that. It's the CAV system in Milton Keynes. It's called OneDrive. And we've actually overseen the project and then looking at not just the technology side, the technology element, but also in terms of policy, governance, what the UK government should look at. And we actually help them to actually draft with all the key stakeholders to actually sit down together and understanding, because there are different steps of CAV, right? There are full, if we go to the extreme, we just sit in a CAV and then we do nothing. But then intermediate, it's like we have to have a driver and then we need to action. The driver needs to action. And for different stage or level of CAV, the responsibility are going to be different. Okay, so if you're interested, have a look at the UK government. They have already drafted up quite a good and comprehensive governance paper.
Maybe I can add a little bit to this, and I have two thoughts there. And one is, I think if you look at Hong Kong, like for example in Central, the environment is not that bad, because what we have in Hong Kong is like barriers, which avoiding that people just crossing the street everywhere. And basically you can only cross the street at the intersection. So that helps a lot. And what we do in mobility is also then enable the infrastructure. And this is what we do in Singapore, but also in our test fields in Europe and the US, where we have installed additional sensors which are communicating with the autonomous vehicle and basically can pre-warn the fleet of vehicles if an object or a human being is stepping on the street, if the signal is red. So that can increase safety a lot. If you analyze accident statistics, a lot of accidents happen because of human failure. I don't want to argue on this. I mean, with the current tests we have with autonomous vehicles, of course, we learn a lot, and we also have certain situations where the car is not able to detect a dangerous situation. And especially in a city environment, I'm pretty confident. And also on highways, we have already, also in Germany, is a very famous project at the A9 highway, where we have basically monitored the safety areas and can inform the connected vehicles immediately if something dangerous is happening, so that they can adjust and they can act much faster than human beings. So I think this is one side. I think there are definitely, so technology is an enabler, and if we use it right, we can solve these challenges and overcome it. Another trend I see, especially if you look like Tesla, which goes exactly to the question you asked, what about insurance? So who is paying if, for whatever reasons, this autonomous vehicle has an accident? And what Tesla is doing right now is they starting their own insurance company. And guess what? They're doing this for a reason, because they want in future, they say, okay, don't worry, you have a Tesla insurance, we will cover this for you. I mean, there's still some policy changes we need to do and to set the framework. But I think all these challenges we can overcome.
Thank you for that, Daniel. And if I could maybe go online and maybe ask Yuan a question. Now, you mentioned, as mentioned in Charles' presentation, and it's also discussed this morning, public transport by its nature is actually designed with the almost polar opposite of what social distancing requires in a pandemic. Now, I know you have quite a large overview of what's happening in other countries. Could you maybe talk about what's happening in the public transport systems around the world that have been actually hit hard by COVID in terms of ridership and services being significantly affected? How are they being impacted, and how are they adapting to this, Yuan?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is a really challenging situation for a lot of public transportation agencies in the world. So since the start of the pandemic, most of the public transportation system have seen the downturn in the ridership. And for cities like New York, London, Paris, the ridership declines more than 90% during the peak of the pandemic. And slowly over time, it's recovered back to like a 20%, 30% of the service level and the ridership level. And as a sequence of that, it posed a lot of financial difficulties to the public transportation system. How these systems are funded depends on each scenario. Some public transportation is fully funded by themselves, such as Transport for London, while some other system like the public transportation in Paris and in New York, those systems are like 30% or half funded by the public funding in addition to the ticket revenue. So in this case, a lot of them are facing the revenue downturn and the capital investment declines. So this really challenged public transportation to think about what's the level of service and what's the level of maintenance they can keep up with. And one thing I find quite interesting and very has a great potential for a city like Hong Kong is to rethink what should be included in public transportation service. So in many cities in Europe and in some of the cities in North America, scooters and micromobility were not legalized. It was not a formal transportation mode before the pandemic, but during all this challenging time, people are reluctant to get back to high density areas such like a train or a bus. People are taking more rides by bike or using those shared modes or shared micromobility. So city like London, they just announced the new procurement for a scooter sharing pilot. And also Paris started that a couple months ago. So this really tells us in addition to public transportation, the micromobility, active mobility can be considered as a form of public transportation as well. If that is part of the equation, then during this challenging time, like a public transportation agency may think about how to fund those initiatives in addition to existing train and bus services and get people moving to places they have to go.
Thank you, Yuan. And if I can just stay online and ask Dr. Yuri, for the presentation, you talked about the data trust and getting these operators together, and I find it also fascinating that the last time there was such cooperation was back in the Octopus days. While you were doing this project, was there anything that you found unexpected or interesting that, through the experience you had with this very interesting project?
Yes. The big challenge that was suggested was that it was going to be very difficult to get private operators, and the transport operators in Hong Kong are mostly private, to share data with anyone, whether it's government or whether it's the other operators. But actually, once we met with them and explained the purpose of this project and pointed out that smart city development really very much depends on having data and data sharing at its heart, because policy making in a smart city development has to be holistic. It has to bring in data from many different sources in order to get a comprehensive view for policy directions. And I think without exception, the operators all recognized that that was the way that not just Hong Kong, but the world was going. The question was, how could we protect their commercial interests? Because data obviously has a value to each commercial operator. So we were looking for a model which both protected commercial interests, promoted commercial interests in the sense that part of the use cases would be about increasing operational efficiency and understanding market trends and passenger requirements in greater depth. And part of the benefit, of course, would also be directly for passengers and for people using public transport. And part of the benefit would be to government, who will be in a position to have better data, data relevant to understanding the way people moved and what the demand for mobility was. So, for example, there are many outlying areas in Hong Kong which are not very well served, the last mile, first mile problem for people who are living in areas which are not, say, close to an MTR, because most people do travel by MTR. So what is the best way of providing those links which can connect to the MTR, utilizing public like buses, taxis, or whatever other mode of transport is available? And after going through going through those issues and examining them in detail, all the operators agreed that, subject to issues like data security and privacy, they would be prepared to share with a trusted third party like the University of Hong Kong. And I think the word trust is very important here. So trusted third party, they would be prepared to participate in that and look forward to the outcome of the analysis. So that in a sense was perhaps the biggest surprise. To be honest, it wasn't totally a surprise to me, because I was convinced from the word go that we would get cooperation if it was put to operators in that way. I believe in the past that government transport department, for example, tends to talk to operators separately, but not collectively. The operators have not, as far as I know, and I may be wrong here, but my understanding was that they'd never previously collectively got together after the setting up of Octopus Cup. So this was, it was the actual process by which we achieved this that was important, and I think it holds good lessons for Hong Kong going forward.
And what's promising is that, other than the data, if this sort of data trust, the concept that you're proving, can be repeated, if it can be repeated, it can be scaled, and that can be applied to other transport initiatives.
Absolutely, yes. That's
So-
exactly the point.
So we now come back to Hong Kong, and I think my final question is actually to Charles. Like, your topic actually dovetails very nicely again with Daniel's vision about an integrated solution. Now, you mentioned in your PowerPoint about the smart road network, a smart corridor. Now, the COVID, the way it's affected the way that people travel, even the flow of goods. Everybody's ordering online. We don't go to the shops anymore. Now, for this, in terms of, you feel that if one argues that something like this is an opportunity to innovate, for that smart road network, smart corridor, within a post-COVID environment, where do you see the first sectors or businesses really getting together, take advantage of this concept to make it happen? So obviously what you mentioned is a very comprehensive vision, but how do we make something like that happen, particularly now with the opportunity that COVID has provided in a way?
Thank you, Ron. I think after the COVID-19, actually, people are getting more open to the new technologies. And then I think this is a very good opportunity for the smart corridor. Of course, for the smart corridor, like the autonomous for the last mile, it would be very beneficial in this kind of after COVID situation, because people don't want to have a contact delivery or whatever. The elderly can't go out, but if the autonomous vehicles, they can go out for the last mile, or they can go out for a short distance to a shopping mall or whatever. I think they will find it very useful and practical to adopt autonomous vehicle in a smart corridor. Of course, right now, just now, we mentioned about a lot of AV, and then, of course, we are still in the testing stage. The smart corridor actually is the ultimate stage that when, with the smart corridor and qualified AV, then we can have a more safety environment to drive on, a more reliable pattern to go for the origin and destinations. And And even like the shared mobility will be more successful to push on. I just want to reiterate that no matter whether it's shared mobility or autonomous vehicles, one important thing is we want it to be integrated system. We don't want a shared mobility, then the youngster just want to have making more trips. Instead of taking a public transport, they take a shared mobility. It's not the way we want for long-term planning. Or we don't want everyone just because they want the luxury, they don't want to drive, they want to purchase AV, and then they just go to anywhere. We want to be integrated with the overall public transport system so that we become more efficient in terms of the whole network. It will be more sustainable, and also it will become a more green transport concept rather than individuals package. It's a whole package concept.
Thank you, Charles. And I see by the time we're out of time for today's panel, but before that, I'd like just quickly thank the speakers we have today in Hong Kong for sharing the views, and also to our online speakers in Singapore as well as Shanghai. Thank you for joining us online as well. Now, there's an online questionnaire that the organizers would like you to fill out, so please do give us your thoughts. But with that, I'd like to close today's panel and thank everyone once again for participating.